Louise Banks gives birth to a daughter and watches her grow into a young woman, only to see her succumb to a rare and incurable disease. She is heartbroken, and her life changes forever. It all begins on the day they arrived. Louise is a linguistics professor at a local university. She is on her way to her first class in the morning when she notices the commotion around the television in the common areas. There's a strange buzz in the air that morning, but she ignores it. She greets her class, but finds the students too distracted by their phones to pay attention. A student asks her to turn on the television. On the screen, breaking news is being broadcast. An unidentified flying object has landed in Montana, and 8 more have landed in locations around the world. At that moment, the university alarm rings, and Louise dismisses her class. On her way home, she finds the world changed and in turmoil. People are evacuating, jets flying overhead and the army taking control. At home, Louise watches the news and discovers that 12 of the unidentified objects have landed. Not knowing what to do, she goes to work the next day, only to find that classes are indefinitely suspended. She stays in her office and tunes into the live updates. At this moment, 2 men visit her in her office. It is Colonel G.T. Weber from Army Intelligence. She remembers him from that time she helped with translations with some insurgents. Weber tells her that she is the main choice for translations, and that's why he is in her office and not in Berkeley's. He plays for her a recording of a human speaking with an entity that emits low grunts. Louise knows it is an entity from the objects. She tells Weber that it's impossible to translate unless she is in the same room as the speaker, observing, because this is a language that doesn't exist on Earth. Weber sees this as a ruse on her part to be part of the scene, but he refuses. He doesn't want the research center to become a tourist spot for anyone who has top security clearance. He tells Louise that if he leaves now, her chance will be gone. He starts to walk away, but Louise calls after him. She asks if they're going to call Danvers next, another linguist, and tells him that before they commit to him, they should ask him the Sanskrit word for war and its translation. Later that night, Louise falls asleep in front of the television when she wakes up to a helicopter landing in her yard. Weber has returned and asks her the meaning of Gavesti, the Sanskrit word for war, and Louise responds, a desire for more cows. Weber knows that Louise is more capable of taking on the job and orders her to be ready in 10 minutes. Louise joins the team in the helicopter and meets Dr. Ian Donnelly, a theoretical physicist with whom she will work closely. Weber tells her that the priority is to know what they want and where they come from. They arrive at the site in Montana and are briefed on the protocol and taken to Dr. Kettler, who vaccinates them. Louise reaches the main control room and discovers that the site is communicating with the other locations. She meets Agent Halpern from the CIA, who tells her that they haven't gathered much information from the object since it landed. Louise and Ian are taken to another room, where they are fitted with protective suits. They join a small team and head towards the object, now known as the capsule. Every 18 hours, a door opens at the bottom of the capsule, and the team enters via a platform. Louise watches in awe as they enter the capsule and feels the profound absurdity of the situation. As the platform reaches its limit, the team jumps into the tunnel, floating towards the rectangular light ahead of them. Louise hesitates, having second thoughts, but Weber grabs her, and they proceed through the anteroom. They reach the main hall and see a glass wall separating them from the entities inside. The team places a caged bird on the floor, indicating that as long as the bird is still alive, the oxygen levels in the room are safe. Soon, 2 giant cephalopod-like creatures appear behind the glass. They call the aliens heptapods, due to their 7 limbs. The session is quickly wrapped up, and they are taken to the decontamination room. Weber tells Louise and Ian that they have 2 hours to figure something out. They continue watching the news as the world burns in lockdowns, riots, and cult rituals. Agent Halpern communicates with the other locations, but they also fail. The next day, they are ready to enter the capsule again when Louise has an idea. She brings a whiteboard and a marker, saying that while they may not be able to understand their spoken language, they may have a written basis for the language they are speaking. Inside the capsule, Louise writes the word human and moves forward to show them. After a few seconds, one of the heptapods responds, extending its limb and creating a circular symbol with strokes. It continues tracing different circular symbols, giving the team their first major achievement. Back at the site, Weber questions whether this is the right approach and how he could explain it to the higher office. Louise defends her approach, stating that if they do not teach the heptapods their own language, it will lead to many misunderstandings, and things will take 10 times longer. Weber agrees for now but demands that she present a list of words before the next session. Louise learns that not all countries are open to this friendly approach. The government fears that other countries will follow General Shang's and China's decision for a hostile move. Meanwhile, Louise explains to Weber that in order to communicate with the heptapods, they first need to teach them the basics of the English language before they can move on to the big question, which is the purpose of their arrival. They return to the capsule, and Louise introduces herself. Sensing the confusion of the heptapods, Louise steps forward and removes her protective suit. The team panics, but she reassures them that everything is fine and continues with the operation. She approaches the screen and places her palm on the glass. One of the heptapods imitates her action, and they properly introduce themselves again. Ian unzips his protective suit and introduces himself as well. She asks who they are, and each of the heptapods writes their names on the glass. Ian decides to call them Abbott and Costello. When they return from the capsule, Louise dreams of her daughter for the first time. Due to the success of the session, Weber allows the operation to continue despite the risks of contamination. Meanwhile, tensions among the soldiers rise at the camp, unaware of what kind of threat they are facing. Later that night, Louise dreams of her daughter again. They are in a field, exploring flowers and picking stones in a nearby stream. In the following weeks, Louise and Ian continue their research. Besides seeing and hearing the heptapods, they leave no other impressions. The chemical composition of their spacecraft is unknown. Assuming the capsules communicate with each other, they do so undetected. They still have no idea why the capsules chose to land at these specific locations. One of Louise's first major achievements is learning that there is no correlation between what a heptapod says and what it writes. She also discovers that the heptapod's writing is semasiographic, meaning it represents meaning and does not convey sound. Through the Pakistan site, they learn that a heptapod logogram is free from time. Their writing has no forward or backward direction. Linguists like Louise call this nonlinear spelling, which makes them wonder if this is also how they process ideas. Louise and Ian study their language enough to create their first response. Now they are working to expand their vocabulary, which will take another month. One night, after a session, Louise and Ian are together in the back of a truck, contemplating the capsule. Ian expresses his admiration for her intelligence and willingness to continue, and they talk a bit about their personal lives. Louise thinks it now depends on them, and Ian is happy it has come to this. Outside the site, the world has not handled the presence of the capsules well. Looting and riots continue, especially after a leaked photograph of the aliens went viral. Tensions around the site have also worsened, with some soldiers thinking it's better to open fire first before the aliens attack. On another work night, Louise dreams of her daughter again. She shows her a book about planets, and her daughter shows her a picture she drew for her class project. She begins to explain to her daughter why she and her father are no longer together, but her daughter says it's okay. She is pulled from her daydream by Ian and steps outside to get some air. She thinks of her again. This time she sees her as a child, and then as a teenager, lying sick in a hospital bed. Later, Louise finds herself in her room with Ian, who is discussing the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis with her, where if you immerse yourself in another language, you can actually rewire your brain. He asks if she is dreaming in her language, and when she looks up, a heptapod is in her room. Louise wakes up in her bed, relieved that it was all just a dream. She meets with Weber, who takes her to the control room to do a translation in Mandarin. It turns out their satellite intercepted a phone conversation with the Chinese military chief, General Shang. Louise translates the first sentence, saying that each of the 12 is offering advanced technology and that their science team is trying to decipher the sets. She tells Weber that she doesn't understand the following phrases: outfits, honor, and flowers. He says that an hour ago, China mobilized forces, and now Russia is following suit. Louise realizes that the phrases belong to sets of mahjong pieces and learns that they are using a game to communicate with their heptapods. She raises her concerns about how problematic this is, with each conversation becoming like a game, and each idea expressed through opposition, victory, and defeat. Weber then gives her an ultimatum and orders her to ask the big question, whether they are ready or not. Louise, Ian, and the team enter the capsule again. Louise begins to form her logograms, asking the heptapods their purpose. Costello responds with a message saying, "Offer weapon." Back at the site, a dispute arises between Louise, Weber, and Agent Halpern. Louise insists that the heptapods may not know the difference between a weapon and a tool, and with the complex human language, sometimes one can be both. Ian adds that they don't know if the heptapods are offering a weapon or asking them to offer one, like the beginning of a trade. The only way to know the difference between the two is to go back inside. A call interrupts their meeting, and Agent Halpern offers his theory that this is the aliens' way of dividing and making them fight among themselves. The council dissolves, and Louise and Ian feel defeated. Back in the control room, chaos unfolds. China and Russia receive the same message, interpreting it as a threat and cutting their communication with the other capsule sites, going offline. Louise insists that this will only worsen the situation, and they need to communicate with each other. She rushes with Ian to re-enter the capsule. Fearing an imminent threat, several soldiers in the capsule stage a revolt, carrying boxes of explosives and positioning them in the room, set to detonate in 10 minutes. Louise and Ian arrive, and one of the soldiers tries to stop them, but they eventually let them go, despite knowing the bomb will kill them. Louise and Ian enter the room to talk to Abbott and Costello, completely unaware of the bomb just a few meters away. Louise asks them if they are offering something to the humans. The heptapods respond with words like technology, visitors, and friends. She then tells them to give the technology now. Suddenly, Abbott starts banging on the glass. Unbeknownst to them, Weber has sent security to detain the rebellious soldiers. Back in the room, Abbott continues banging on the glass. Louise steps forward, thinking Abbott wants her to write on the screen. She places both palms on the glass and starts writing along with Abbott. In the midst of this, she dreams of her daughter again, falling asleep and holding her hand. After they finish writing, Costello fires, leaving hundreds of symbols on the screen at once. They look back, hearing gunfire. As time approaches 0, Abbott forces them to leave the room just as the bombs explode and the room seals shut. Louise and Ian are thrown into the antechamber, unconscious but alive. Louise wakes up and finds herself in Dr. Kettler's office with a concussion. They survived the explosion, and Kettler informs her about the rebellious soldiers. She looks for Ian and finds him in the main room with Weber and the rest of the team. She tells them they need to go back and explain to the heptapods what happened. He tells her it's impossible because their orders have changed now. They need to evacuate and prepare for retaliation. At that moment, a tremor interrupts their conversation. The team rushes outside and sees the capsule rising several kilometers off the ground. Later that night, China officially declares war against the aliens, urging several other countries to do the same. Louise and Ian continue decoding the last message from the heptapods. As they discuss, Louise's daughter enters her mind again. She is now a teenage girl, asking Louise about a certain term that means two parties make a deal and both receive something in return. Back at the site, Louise wakes up from her dream and learns that Ian has made a significant discovery. He says the symbol for time is everywhere. He then calculates the amount of negative space in the message and concludes that it means 1 of 12. Louise presents this discovery to the council, saying that the message the heptapods gave them is 1 of 12 and that they need to communicate with the other sites to piece together the 12 messages. Agent Halpern interrupts and tells her it's useless because they are out of communication and everyone is preparing for conflict. He then plays a recording made from Russia. The aliens gave their final message. There is no time. Many become one. The recording is interrupted by gunfire. Louise insists on her theory, but Halpern remains hostile, asking how they will convince the other sites to share their data. Ian intervenes, saying they will offer their data in exchange, turning this into a non-zero-sum game. Louise takes this and remembers her conversation with her daughter. While Louise listens to the men arguing in the room, she disconnects and steps outside. There is no more time, and she must take control of the situation into her own hands. She walks to the capsule, and surprisingly, it sends a craft down. She enters the craft and is enveloped in a mist-like state. She struggles for a minute to breathe until her lungs stabilize. Upon opening the craft, she finds herself in the room behind the glass wall, filled with a similar mist. Costello approaches her, and Louise learns that Abbott died in the explosion. She breaks down and apologizes on behalf of humanity. She then asks the heptapod to send a message to the other sites. Costello says that Louise already has the weapon and should use it. She doesn't understand and asks what their purpose is. Costello says that their purpose is to help humanity because in 3,000 years, they will need humanity's help. She asks how they can know the future. At that moment, her daughter again enters her mind. They are in the same field, playing by the same stream. Louise looks confused and finally asks Costello who the child is. It turns out that Louise's dreams of her daughter were not dreams but premonitions of the future. With this last message, Costello disappears into the mist. Louise is ejected as the capsule tips on its side. A convoy approaches her, and Ian wraps a blanket around her. As she is being placed in the car, she has another premonition. She is standing by the lake with her daughter. She asks Louise why her father no longer looks at her the same way. Louise feels conflicted but tells her it's because she told her father something he wasn't prepared to hear. Something about a rare and incurable disease. In the present, Louise realizes why her future husband left her. Meanwhile, all the capsules around the world have also tipped, and the entire planet is preparing for a global war. As Louise wanders through the site, she has another premonition. Her future daughter asks her why her name is Hannah. Louise tells her that her name is special because it is a palindrome, meaning that if written backward, it will still say Hannah. In her vision, she also sees herself publishing a book about the universal language of the heptapods and teaching the language to other humans. She finally realizes the true purpose of the heptapods. Their weapon is language, and they shared all their language with humanity. Their language opens time, and once you learn it, you begin to perceive time the way they do, in a non-linear state, so you can see what is to come. She shares her discovery with Ian and Weber, but Weber tells her the mission is over. Outside, Louise has another premonition. This time, she is at a gala at the UN. General Shang approaches her and says he only came because he wanted to meet her. He tells her that 18 months ago, she did something that even his superiors couldn't do, and changed his mind. He continues saying that she called him on his private number. Louise is confused and says she doesn't know his private number, but the general pulls out his phone and shows her the number. General Shang says that now she knows. He feels it was important to show that number, even though he doesn't know why. He then tells her that she told him something he will never forget. She told the general her wife's last words. In the present, Louise realizes what she needs to do to stop this global war. She goes back to the site and obtains Agent Halpern's satellite phone. She calls General Shang's private number. This alerts security, and they send several soldiers to confront her. Louise escapes capture and hides in the decontamination room. General Shang answers the call, and she tells him what her purpose is. Ian joins her in the room and protects her from the soldiers. She finally transmits her message to General Shang, and he receives it. The call is a success, and she raises her hands in the air, surrendering to security. Suddenly, China backs down from the attack, and other countries follow suit. The 12 sites then agree to share their data and complete the puzzle pieces together. With humanity working as one, the capsules begin to rise and disappear into outer space as quickly as they arrived. Louise and Ian stand outside, watching the evacuation of the site. She asks him if he would change things if he could see his entire life, from beginning to end. He tells her that the most surprising thing that has ever happened in his life was not meeting the heptapods, but rather meeting her. He then declares his love for her. Louise looks at him, knowing this is the face of her future husband, and returns his love with a hug. Even knowing what will happen in the future, that they will marry, that they will give birth to Hannah, and that Hannah will eventually pass away. She fully accepts all of this with an open heart, despite knowing that Ian will eventually leave them.